For the past 2-3 years, I'm sure you've been hearing about bulldozer justice. What is bulldozer justice? In some states, if you observe, when a person commits a crime, what does the state government do? They demolish their house. This led to accusations against state governments that if someone commits a crime, why should their family be punished? This shouldn't happen. Due to this, the entire matter was being heard in the Supreme Court, and finally, yesterday, a significant judgment was delivered. Yes, let me tell you that the Supreme Court has issued some new guidelines, and we'll learn about all of them. Exactly what they are and what has been said. There's a lot to learn. Let's proceed. A very significant ruling has come from the Supreme Court. As I was telling you, there were accusations that state governments were trying to deliver justice in the wrong way. In fact, the Supreme Court says that delivering justice is our job. The way you're demolishing houses here, this bulldozer justice is wrong somewhere. This shouldn't happen. Due to this practice, if you look at recent times, many states had adopted such measures, where if any individual was caught in a crime, even before being convicted, even before charges were proven, their house would be demolished to improve public perception. Furthermore, you can see that the Supreme Court has declared that no house of an accused can be demolished solely on the basis of allegations. You cannot demolish someone's house just based on accusations. And let me tell you, several petitions were filed in the Supreme Court, and hearings were ongoing regarding this. The judgment was already reserved on the 1st, but yesterday, the complete judgment has come out. Also, let me tell you that in this entire petition, you'll specifically find petitions related to the state governments of Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, where it's being stated that some Muslim tenants' houses were wrongfully demolished, which shouldn't have happened. Well, the question now is what aspects the Supreme Court has mentioned in its judgment yesterday, which is being widely discussed. First, look at the discussion about due process of law. The Supreme Court has stated that suppose if an individual has been living for 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it may be, but if their house is legally constructed, the government has no right to demolish it. Right to shelter is a fundamental right, the Supreme Court declared yesterday. Second, the Supreme Court talked about the separation of powers. The Supreme Court's basic argument is that are you trying to deliver justice yourself by demolishing houses? Because in our country's constitution, whose job is it to deliver justice? Is it the executives? Is it the government's? No. Ultimately, delivering justice falls under the court's jurisdiction. So the Supreme Court has said, please understand this separation. If someone is doing something wrong, arrest them, bring them to court. Whatever punishment needs to be given, we will give, but you cannot deliver justice by yourself. The third important point made here is about protection against collective punishment. As I was telling you, suppose if in a family one boy, girl, or any person has done something wrong, why should the entire family be punished? This shouldn't happen. Because a house is not just a property, but a shelter for the entire family. Anyone taking such steps, demolishing houses, should think 10 times about the impact on that family. What impact it will have on the women and children living there. This is a significant point made by the Supreme Court. Next, the Supreme Court has spoken about selective demolition. You see, accusations are being made in several states about this matter. Consider, for instance, what's happening in Uttar Pradesh, where the state government specifically targets homes belonging to people from a particular community or religion. Even though there might be many other illegally constructed buildings, the government doesn't touch them, but carries out selective demolitions, which is wrong and violates the principle of fairness, as stated by the Supreme Court. Next, let's look at the important guidelines issued by the Supreme Court, which are crucial to understand. First, the Supreme Court stated that you cannot directly demolish any house. If you believe a house is illegal or there's an illegal structure, you must give at least 15 days notice. You can give 30 days, 2 months, or even a year, but a minimum of 15 days notice is mandatory. This notice must be sent through registered post. Additionally, it must be displayed on the outer portion of the house. Suppose there's no response from the residents. They might receive the notice and approach the court claiming their house is legal. In such cases, the matter will proceed through the courts. However, if there's no response from the household, then demolition can proceed. But what does proper demolition entail? If there are children, girls, or anyone living in the house, you must give them adequate time to remove their belongings. It shouldn't be that people suddenly find themselves on the streets overnight. This must be considered, and any demolition must be properly documented so that if any issues arise later, or the matter goes to court, it can be thoroughly investigated. Next, another significant point made by the Supreme Court is about compensation for arbitrary action. It states that if any official is found acting wrongfully, they will face action. Moreover, for victims, suppose the government wrongfully demolished a house that shouldn't have been demolished. The government claimed it was illegal, but family members insisted it wasn't. When the matter went to court, and the court ruled it was legal and shouldn't have been demolished, in such cases, the government must provide proper compensation. The government has stated that if officials wrongfully demolish houses, compensation can be deducted from their salaries because the Constitution doesn't permit such abuse. Next, the final point made by the Supreme Court is about compliance and implementation. This means proper implementation of all guidelines issued by the Supreme Court. How will this implementation work? First, these guidelines will be sent to all state governments and union territories. Then, what will the state government do? They will send these complete procedures to all district magistrates within their state and instruct them to implement them properly. Additionally, a digital portal or website must be created within 3 months so that all demolition documentation, including videography, can be uploaded there. All this has been stated by the Supreme Court. Next, I should mention that the main petitioner in this case, Jamiat Ulama-e Hind, has welcomed this Supreme Court judgment, calling it a historic verdict. However, some victims are quite disappointed with the Supreme Court's judgment. Why? Because they say while the Supreme Court has addressed future cases, ensuring state governments won't act arbitrarily going forward. But what about what has already happened? What people have already suffered? Those whose houses were illegally demolished. The Supreme Court hasn't announced any compensation for them. For example, Rashid Khan from Udaipur and Mohammed Hussain from Ratlam say their properties were demolished because they belong to a marginalized section. So how will they rebuild their homes now? So somewhere, the Supreme Court's judgment should have also addressed compensation for those whose houses were wrongfully demolished in the past. But the Supreme Court hasn't mentioned anything about this. Moreover, if you look at this situation particularly in Uttar Pradesh, where you must have heard terms like bulldozer Baba and bulldozer justice, how did Yogi Adityanath's government react to this? The Uttar Pradesh government has welcomed the Supreme Court's verdict. Obviously, no government would ever say that a Supreme Court decision is wrong. They welcomed it and stated that this judgment will help prevent organized crime and instill fear in people to prevent them from doing anything illegal.